So let's talk some possibilities for what might be in a Warhammer 40k launch box set for 11th edition. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking and speculating on what's usually the biggest Warhammer 40k release every 3 years. At this point, generally people are expecting the end of 10th edition to be coming. Games Workshop's got a little bit predictable with their release. Over the last few 40k editions, they seem to have struck a formula that works well for them. The game has rather expanded pretty massively over the past 3 editions, coming in 3-year cycles with roughly the same sort of structure. I'd be kind of surprised if they shake up the formula too much from that. And now for most people's expectations, the end of 10th edition is likely to have some sort of end edition campaign, a few more model releases alongside I'm sure, but then likely building up for Warhammer 40k 11th edition, which is fairly likely to be sometime next June, as that's the rough time when 8th, 9th and 10th all came out, 9th and 10th both coming after a 3-year gap on the previous. In some previous videos on the channel that I'll link below, I talked through a few hopes for the rest of 10th edition, and then another one after that I talked about in-game rules changes. I think I'd like to do at least 2 more focusing on speculation for 11th edition. In this one let's talk Warhammer 40k launch boxes, and then do one for hopes for new models for each faction in the game. It does seem that speculating and rumours on launch boxes is a pretty popular subject for conversation right now. There's been about 8 other YouTube channels that have done it in some sort of form. This has felt really quite a lot earlier than people were speculating on this in earlier editions. I guess maybe that's part of a symptom of Games Workshop's schedule being quite so well known now. In any case though, in this one let's talk about the launch of 10th edition, the factions most likely to be in the box, roughly how the box sets tend to get set up, and go through a few maybe slightly more likelier picks to build an 11th edition box, more for fun than really being an accurate prediction or anything. For the launch itself and how we're likely to get information, 9th edition was announced on the 23rd of May, so not really all that long before a new edition came out. 10th edition was announced in March 2023, giving Games Workshop a bit more of a long build-up period. The launch shows for these typically featured a couple of new models, though really not going all in on that front. For the 10th edition one, we got shown off the new Terminator model and the new Termagant, both of which wound up being in the launch box, a fun cinematic hype and reveal trailer, showing the 2 antagonists duke it out, including lots of features of the new miniatures, and a few broad brush teasers of the rules. Each edition there usually tends to be a focus on Space Marines and then an antagonist faction of some sort. They feature as the poster child for that edition, get in the launch box, and have a whole bunch of new miniatures released for them. In recent times we've had Death Guard, then Necrons, then Tyranids in that order. Then after that, Games Workshop seems to do around 2 to 3 months of previews to hype things up, starting off by drip feeding a few more new models that are going to be in the launch box, then having a grand unveiling of that, then around about another month or so to go until they actually put it on sale and the new edition goes live, and they often give us teasers of other faction rules at that time. The launch boxes themselves tend to be really quite a big deal for Warhammer 40k. Great big box sets that do have a high price tag, but also at least for Games Workshop they tend to be about the very best deals on Warhammer 40k that you're ever likely to get. Typically 2-4 armies duking it out. They tend to be amongst the very most popular and best selling of Games Workshop's products, so really quite a big deal for them, and the kits that get featured in the box are pretty important for collectors of either Space Marines or the Antagonist faction, as they're likely to be a lot easier to pick up in the new edition. It's kind of understandable there's so much interest in it. One half of the box is near guarantees to be Space Marines. The Adepts Astartes and their power armour have always been the poster boys of Warhammer 40k. And literally every box set has had Space Marines fighting against Antagonist faction of either Chaos or Xenos. The only one where it wasn't technically generic Space Marines was Dark Vengeance when they had Dark Angels step in, but they're still very much Space Marines even if they weren't for one flavour of them. There seems very little chance that Games Workshop would take these Space Marines out of the launch box set. Just from a business point of view, it'd be kind of a silly move. They're the biggest and most widely collected army by a huge margin. In a poll I did a year or so back, over a third of people collect Space Marines, and that's not even counting the Divergent chapters, which means that just literally one half of the box set is likely to have an appeal to about half the 40k player base, if not more. On top of that, I think it's kind of unlikely that they'd be painted as anything other than Ultramarines. Again, perhaps from a sales point of view, to avoid confusing anyone that they might not be relevant to any one chapter. I think people generally understand the Ultramarines as the sort of generic box art for the Space Marines these days. If you see Space Marines painted as Ultramarines, then for the vast majority of them at least, you can field them in any chapter. I certainly don't think they'd go down the line of putting chapter-specific details on the shoulder pads as they did with Dark Vengeance. That led to a whole bunch of people chopping off the shoulder pads. Obviously Space Marines don't need the updates anywhere near as much as other factions out there, but the way that Games Workshop's been doing their range, there's still plenty of things they could certainly release for them. Plenty of outstanding things they could update from Firstborn to Primaris, never mind any other new Primaris creations they come out with. The bigger question is who might be the Antagonist faction. and it seems that general internet opinion has largely settled on Orks. I guess it won't be 100% guaranteed until Games Workshop releases, or where things leak to the point where it's beyond any shadow of doubt, but they do seem by far the most likely to me as well. I did a poll at least fairly early in 10th edition, about 18 months ago now. People were suspecting either Orks or maybe Emperor's Children then, given that people knew that they were on the way. Obviously we know that we didn't get the Emperor's Children. It seems that the vast majority of rumours that people have been talking about do seem to be Ork related. I'm sure a lot of those originate from Chapter Master Valrak's channel. There certainly could be more sources. I've not seen too many people strongly rumouring for another thing. These are the starter sets that we've had in previous editions. In 2nd edition it was Orks, then in 3rd Dark Eldar. In 4th it was Tyranids for the Battle for Macragge. In 5th edition it was Orks once more with Black Reach. In 6th and 7th it was Chaos Space Marines with Dark Vengeance. In 8th it was Death Guard with Dark Imperium. It was Necrons then Tyranids. The general trend of those are that outside of Dark Eldar and Death Guard, they've generally been quite popular, well-collected factions, and for the overall character of the Antagonist faction, they've generally been more of a force of evil or chaos, and quite easy to paint as the bad guys next to the Space Marines. So say we've never got a starter box set that's had, say, Tau Empire or Craftworld Eldari in them. Between all that, Orks do seem like a good fit. They're one of the most widely collected armies. In a poll I did last year, around about a fifth of people played them, so around 20%, around the same amount as Tau or Astra Militarum, and two of the armies that were more notably ahead of them are Necrons and Tyranids, and they're very likely only ahead due to featuring in more recent starter sets. They fit the bill of having quite a nice contrast between them and the Marines. They've been in the starter sets twice before, so they're well capable of being there, and they've not been in since a very long time since Black Reach. That was also quite a popular box set that plenty of people have got a good sense of nostalgia for, myself included. They've got a lot of character and fun factor which never hurts, and they also have several kits that people wouldn't really mind seeing updated at this point. There's a fair few from the 5th edition era that seem like they'd be good targets for Games Workshop to refresh. Until we find out for definite though, it could certainly be other options. Perhaps for some of the ones that could be more likely, the Drukhari certainly feel like they're one of the most deserving of being an Antagonist faction once again. They have been before a long time ago, and they're certainly one of the armies that needs a fairly major release wave, not really getting all that much for 10th edition despite having a lot of kits that got removed from the range. My guess is they'd probably not go for them due to being a bit more of a niche faction. They don't have quite so many people collect them, and I strongly suspect that if they decided to go with Drukhari rather than Orks, that would lead to directly fewer box set sales from Games Workshop, which is why I'd guess they'd not go for them, and if they're doing a Drukhari range refresh, hopefully in 11th edition, I suspect it to more likely come with their Drukhari Codex. If they did decide to put them in a launch box though, it'd also seem like a reasonable choice. Otherwise they could do a new faction, the most obvious being Dark Mechanicum, maybe to flesh out an army around Vashtor the Archithane. They have sort of done this when they brought Death Guard out, splitting them off into their own individual faction with a proper miniature range, as opposed to being one way to fill Chaos Space Marines. Otherwise perhaps options could be the Chaos Marines, though it feels like they've had quite a lot of updates recently, and they were in the Dark Vengeance box set more recently than Orks. I guess World Eaters could be fun to expand on their range, though if they were doing that, I would have guessed they might have delayed Angron to release alongside. And otherwise I feel like Tau Empire might be a genuinely not too terrible choice. They have had a lot of Troop Mercenary releases, but not quite so many battle suits outside of new stealth suits recently, though I still guess they'd probably go for a force of more sort of disorder to contrast with the Marines. I'd be interested to hear your takes though. Are Orks the most likely faction, and would you prefer to see it go to them or someone else? Before we move on to talk contents and miniatures, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Titan's Terrain. They're one option for 40k terrain, doing things a bit differently with their folding cardboard terrain set, with the primary selling point of it being super easy to store and transport, at least compared with many other offerings out there. The idea with their stuff is they set up a 3x4 tile grid, making a 45x60 inch board the right size for current Warhammer 40k. Each of those cardboard tiles unfolds and pops a building from it. So you basically have an entire battlefield full of pop-up terrain, and that means that you can store it all flat and transport it around in a box set the same size as a fairly normal sized board game. They've got a few different designs and styles available. It is quite a lot cheaper than Games Workshop terrain, and does have the advantage of being playable right out of the box set, without needing to do hobby work if your hobby time is limited. Being made of folding cardboard does come with its trade-offs though. I'll talk through a few pros and cons of it towards the end of the video. I'll look at a couple of their designs. If you'd like to check them out though, there'll be links down in the video description below, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Getting back to launch box expectations though, I feel like we could probably have a fairly good guess as to what it might cost. The two last examples, Leviathan and Indomitus, felt at least fairly equivalent to each other, and here are the prices in pounds and dollars for them when they released in 2023 and 2020. Adjusting both of those for inflation, it actually seems that they're at least relatively similar prices, somewhere between $250 and $270 or around about £160. So if Games Workshop want to keep the actual price of their product somewhat similar, we could maybe expect somewhere around $270 or £160 for the 11th box. I guess we'll have had a bit more inflation by that point, so put it up to a slightly arbitrary $275 or £165. That still wouldn't be quite as much as the recent Horus Heresy Saturnine box set though. For what's in the box, over the past few editions we've had, there do seem to have been some trends for them. First of all, they generally tend to be new miniatures. Every sculpt is a new one that will first come out in this box set, even if it might be a remake of something that came before. The models in the box set tend to be monopose, or at least very, very nearly so. Games Workshop keeping the sprues absolutely as simple as possible to fit the maximum amount of miniatures in the box, and perhaps also add the possibility of upselling people on the multi-part plastic kit when they release a bit later, often adding a bunch more options for the Space Marines. Then there generally tend to be two factions in the box set. As we've mentioned, Space Marines versus the Antagonist. The Space Marines often tend to go a bit on the character-heavy side of things. And I want to say that out of all the box sets we've had so far, the Space Marines have literally always been outnumbered, usually having a contrast of elite Astartes versus a more Horde-style enemy. Even when they were against Chaos Space Marines, they had cultists in the box to make up the numbers. Typically, both sides of the box have had good numbers of base troops. For the Space Marines recently, we've had Tactical Marines, then Intercessors, then Assault Intercessors, and then the 10th maybe being a bit more unusual with the Inferno Squad sort of taking their place. They felt at least somewhat equivalent though, given that they're standard Space Marines with anti-infantry weapons. And then the Antagonist style faction often tends to have fairly good numbers of their most iconic style troops choice. We have had Plague Marines, Necron Warriors, and Tyranid Termagants all represented recently. I feel like Games Workshop want to add as much excitement into the box set as possible within the limited space, and that means there often tends to be a focus on infantry or elite infantry to make up a bunch of the value. Maybe that keys into going character heavy as well, and for any centerpiece monsters and vehicles, they tend to be more on the sort of medium size as opposed to huge, more up to dreadnought scale than main battle tanks that might take up more space. Then while there do tend to be quite a few resculpts in these, at least the last few have all gone heavy on completely new units that we've never really seen in Warhammer 40k. Things like the Infernus Marines for the Space Marines, the Apothecary Biologists, or Eradicators or Assault Intercessors. Some of them might be similar to things that we've had in the past, though done in quite a different style, so it wouldn't be very easy to proxy one as the other. They don't tend to have named characters, or at least gameplay-wise, and often the points cost of the armies is added up to somewhere in the region of 1,000 points or so, or at least on launch before balance updates. Then joining the miniatures in the box sets, there's the big rulebook, mission cards or anything else needed to play the core game, and then a small paper rulebook for profiles and instructions. Let's get into some specific possibilities for Space Marines and Orks though. For Space Marines, maybe the situation's become a little bit more clear. Now we've had the reveal of the Crux Terminatus box set. I guess we know that the Terminator Assault Squad isn't going to be coming in the launch box now. As mentioned earlier though, Space Marines have an absolute ton of possibilities they could release. The most obvious ones being updated firstborn things they could do in Primaris form. Vanguard Veterans seem absolutely guaranteed to happen at some point, and otherwise for the Tactical and Devastator Squad we don't know whether they're going to phase them out or update them. Beyond that, there's loads of other stuff though. Scout Bikers, a Landspeeder Storm remake, Venerable or Ironclad style Redemptor Dreadnoughts, plenty of tanks including the Indomitable Land Raider, and potentially others such as Centurions. For characters there's going to be absolutely no shortage. Games Workshop could comfortably just play fill in the gaps, putting variations of Chaplains, Lieutenants or Librarians on bikes, jump packs or Gravis armour for quite some time. Never mind any more creative ones like we've seen with the Judaseer or the Apothecary Biologist recently. Then of course they could dream up any number of new Primaris creations. Maybe a little bit pointless to speculate exactly what sort of things they could come up with here. It's really open to the imagination. Maybe for some existing tech things that we've seen though, perhaps a Grav weapon armed squad, seeing as we've had squads armed with Melters, Plasma and Flamer now, and now we've seen the Primaris can get jet bikes. You could maybe have a generic version of what Sabodin Khan is riding. Combining just a few of those possibilities together in one box set, let's start with a Tactical Marine squad. They might just get phased out, though to be honest I could totally see Games Workshop either just selling them alongside as an Intercessor squad variant, or just literally updating the Intercessors to suddenly have the special weapons in the unit once again, as that'd be a great way to get people to buy more of the most common troop for the most common army, even for people who've already had lots. If not though, I guess they'd have to find another sort of base Space Marine force to fill out some rank and file and scrap with infantry. Next up, given they're the single most predictable choice, let's put in the Vanguard Veterans, redone Primaris scale in a similar sort of style to the Stern Guard Veterans. I'll leave them as a 5 squad here. I guess given certain other factional elites though, like the Blade Guard Veterans, they could be cut down to a 3 squad. Feels like they could go either way with this one, with the precedent of both the Blade Guard or the Stern Guard. Then the Marine set tends to go heavy on the characters, so let's add a jump chaplain in to lead them. They still have core Codex Space Marine rules, I think only surviving due to this rather cool Blood Angels model, and to me it's felt quite conspicuous when firstborn character miniatures have survived recently, say for example the Terminator Ancient, again that was only surviving due to a Blood Angels firstborn variant, and then Games Workshop came out and announced a new scale one in Crux Terminatus. The Vanguard veterans will give him something to lead, and Games Workshop do seem to quite enjoy putting chaplains or chaplain variants in their starter box sets over the past 3 editions. Then next up, and going for assuming Games Workshop is going to add something new and creative in, after that previous list I went for the Jet Bike squad here, represented here by this terrible recolouring of Subodhan Khan. We had Outriders in Indomitus, maybe these guys could be more hard-hitting individually, mounting a Gatling cannon and some more elite style melee weapons. I could have quite happily subbed these out though for some sort of different light Primaris vehicle, or an updated style Devastator squad, or some Graf Marines or something. Then for a centrepiece for the Marines, I've given them a Siege Dreadnought here, going for the Ironclad pattern one. Maybe this feels like a little bit of a lazy one, copying the Ballistus Dreadnought that we just had in the 10th edition set. They might not necessarily have any one big centrepiece model, they didn't really in 8th or 9th edition, and maybe there's more chance that it could be something else as well if they've just done a Dreadnought, perhaps a Stormspeeder variant or another light skirmish vehicle of some kind, though perhaps feels like if they were redoing the Landspeeder Storm we might want some scouts in here too. I'll go with the Ironclad here just as it's straightforward and seems likely to have a redemptive version of it done at some point in the future, even if it might not be close by, it's probably going to take less room on the sprues versus a big tank. Then finally to round off the Marines, I've added in another couple of characters. There's a whole bunch of things that you could have done fill in the gaps with. Perhaps with some bikers here we could have added a bike captain, that's definitely on the request list. Arbitrarily though I decided to go for a lieutenant with a jump pack, as it would be all very disappointing if Games Workshop didn't release a big box set that doesn't have a Primaris lieutenant in it. And then again I thought we'd go for something that's just a bit different to other stuff that we've had before, maybe to fill in the niche of the Apothecary Biologist, Judas here, or Combi Lieutenant. For that I decided to go for a variant company champion with a great big hammer. GW had some champion rules that could go around individually and not just with company heroes in the not too distant past. Doesn't feel too much of a stretch, they could bring some back. Comparing that little lot to the Leviathan box set Space Marines, it feels at least somewhat equivalent. Terminators get replaced by bikes, Sternguard with Vanguard, swap the Dread around and change up some characters. In reality, my speculation version might be a bit more weighty on the plastic there. The bikes and the jump packs will take up a bit more room than their equivalents, though it's not likely it's going to be particularly exact anyway. For the other half of the box, if we do go with it being Orks, Orks are maybe less famously basically having a Primaris update of their own at the moment to a new scaling. The single most obvious change is the difference in the boys kits. Games Workshop both sell the new style one with the monopose models versus the old style one, and the new lads are significantly chunkier than the old ones and stand a bit taller as well. Things like the Tank Busters and the new Beast Snaggers tend to be a bit upscaled compared with much of the rest of the Ork range now. So in particular it does feel like a lot of stuff that dates back to 5th edition might be on the agenda for an update at some point or other. If it does wind up being Orks as the Antagonist faction, it means we'll likely get something looking at least somewhat equivalent to Assault on Blackreach, the 5th edition starter set, but expanded in scope. I'm hoping it's going to be a good one, seeing as I collect both factions, and I'll have quite a lot of Orks and Marines on the painting table for quite some time I guess. For Ork miniatures, I feel like there's maybe more scope for Games Workshop expanding the range. They've got a lot of fun creativity and might do things in very unusual ways. You could basically dream up endless weird scrap creations for them if you wanted. Find new variants of squigs for the Beast Snaggers to trap and throw into battle. Have different variants for the Ork subcultures or fighting in slightly unusual ways. Maybe bringing back something like stick bombers. And there's a good bunch of Forge World models that went away as well. Things like the Grot tanks and the Chinook Warcopter. For more core range kits though, there's loads of stuff they could redo. On a smaller scale, there's Looters and Burners, Knobs, Storm Boys, and the Warbiker kits from around the 5th edition kind of era. Flash kits and Mega Knobs weren't too very long after that, so I feel like they'd be a little bit less likely to be replaced straight out, though they're still at the older scaling, so are probably fair game. They could redo some of the vehicle kits, such as the Truck, Death Dread, or maybe Killer Cans. They could redo Gretchen if they wanted to, as they're also from that era, though I'm not exactly sure what they'd really do differently with them. And despite Games Workshop having released a new boys kit, that's still one that needs an update. Putting an Orky half of the box together, I'd be kind of surprised if we don't get some basic boys in the box set, likely with a similar sort of size and feel as the new sculpt ones that they did. Though given that they do new sculpts for the box set, I think they'd have another go at them, and ideally have a full mob that's either all shooter boys or all chopper boys, rather than the weird decision that they made to make them half-half and not have them interchangeable. Given we had 20 Necron warriors and 20 Termagants over the past couple of editions, I've put 20 boys in this one. To lead the clan into battle, we've got a generic war boss. He also seems to be a victim of the scale creep to some extent. The knob leaders of the new boys and tank busters aren't so very different in size to him. And if we had to go for another orc character, firmly on the wish list would be a weird boy, who could really do with a new plastic sculpt given that he's the only resin model left in the range and one of the very few left in Warhammer 40k. If Orks do wind up being the 11th edition Antagonist faction, I feel like it'd be almost certain that he would get an updated miniature, whether he turns up in a launch box or a wider Ork release after. Then for a vehicle or centerpiece model, I went for a Death Dread for this one. I would find it quite fun to see one of these upscaled to be a similar sort of Redemptor size, then perhaps they make some sort of new and different scrap creation for the boys. To expand the numbers a bit, Games Workshop often seem to have made the Antagonist faction extra Horde style. The Tyranids had some Neurogaunts to bulk them out a bit, so let's add in a squad of Gretchen here. They also had a bit of fun factor and could very easily up the model count by quite a bit with very little plastic on the sprues. They are particularly tiny models that you wouldn't need too many parts to assemble. Then to add in a fire support unit that's maybe due for a range refresh, I decided to go for a squad of looters here. Seeming very likely for a refresh, though they might be reinterpreted in some way with a different squad setup. And then for something new, different and creative to add into the box, I went for Gretchen riding on some squigs for this one, maybe squig hopper style like the Night Goblins. They could do a similar sort of thing in many different ways, maybe having some sort of squig herd style units. Just feels like these smaller and more normal sized squigs haven't really seen too much representation on the 40k tabletop besides as bomb squigs and things. Putting that all together and it maybe feels roughly the same sort of size and weight as the Tyranids from Leviathan. They've got a few more big and chunky monsters, though for the basic troops the Ork boys are fairly significantly bigger than the Termagants, so might take up a fair bit more plastic. In any case, putting that together, here's one very loose and speculative idea of what an 11th edition box set might look like. It seems to have got 22 Space Marine models here, including some fairly chunky ones with some bikes, jump packs and a dreadnought, facing off against 43 Orks, including a scaled up Death Dread and really quite a lot of chunky boys. Doing the same thing but with tweaking just a few things though, it could look very very different. Swapping out a couple of the models that I was speculating differently. Here I swapped out the bikes for a squad of grav armed Primaris Marines, maybe done with grav cannons like Devastators perhaps. I switched the Dreadnought out for a Storm Speeder variant. Then for the Orc side of things I went with really quite a lot of small individual units, losing the Death Dread, some looters and some boys, and instead putting in some Mega Knobs, War Bikers, some Storm Boys, and then rescuing the Grot tanks from Forge World, which I hope Games Workshop gets around to making a plastic kit for at some stage. Again, maybe feels roughly equivalent to a Leviathan or Indomitus style box set. I'm sure Games Workshop will give us some good surprises though. In any case though, let me know your thoughts and hopes for 11th edition launch boxes. What would you like to see in the box set? Which factions and which units? I look forward to hearing all your takes down in the comments below. I'll certainly be looking forward to if and when we get some teasers and announcements next year though. That's just about it for this one, though for the end of the video I'll just cycle back to the video sponsor in Titans Terrain and talk briefly once more about their pop-up cardboard terrain system. As mentioned, compared with the more normal sets of terrain out there, it does have some more notable advantages and disadvantages. It probably wins first prize on being easy to store and transport due to being able to fold flat. Most other sets don't pack away this small or this easily. It is far cheaper than Games Workshop's offerings, and pretty well equivalent to cheaper sets of things like MDF. It has the advantage of not needing a whole bunch of hobby work unlike cheaper MDF to get it looking battle ready. Coming pre-coloured is a nice advantage for those of us who don't have loads of time to dedicate to hobby. The unusual design does come with some trade-offs though. Given it's made of folding cardboard, it's a bit less sturdy or hard wearing versus plastic or MDF. It might need a bit more careful use and looking after, and the ruins don't tend to be very weight bearing, so you can't really put models on the top floors of buildings so well. The grid layout can give you a bit less flexibility than some out there as well. You can get some variety by rotating the tiles a bit, though it might not be the worst just to have maybe an extra wall or two to put on top of it to break up some of the most major firing lanes. It's probably not right for everyone. It doesn't do tournament style layouts, though I've heard a fair amount of good anecdotes from people using it. It can do fine for a casual set of 40k terrain. They have a few different designs available. There's a Forgotten Furnace one, a sort of Chaos Foundry with some burnt out factories and glowing runes and things. There's perhaps a more standard Shattered Hive Ruined City sort of affair, bombed out buildings and armoured containers. Each of those also has an expansion centerpiece set as well, getting two big tiles that push together for one enormous building if you want something in the middle to dominate the board. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. You can check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to take a look at their stuff. In any case though, I'll leave that one there for now. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel and you'd like to help support and keep the videos coming, then Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. You can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.